everyone, and welcome to the webinar that WonderWorks is doing today. And we are really excited to have you on this Introduction to Holacracy webinar. My name is Ra, and I'm a WonderWorker and Holacracy partner at WonderWorks. I'd like to also introduce Anna McGrath. And Anna McGrath launched as a co-founder of WonderWorks and launched WonderWorks in 2013. And WonderWorks continues to be the only USA Holacracy licensed provider. For the past 2.5 years, WonderWorks has implemented Holacracy in numerous and diverse organizations with lots of success. And we are going to be jumping right into the presentation that Anna has for us. Anna, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Ra. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm really appreciating having you on the team. So today we're going to be talking about Holacracy, and this will be an introductory webinar. So what we'll go through is some of the basics of behind Holacracy. But to actually kick it off, what I want to do is start off with a little bit about what brought WonderWorks to Holacracy, because our focus had been really looking at, okay, what does it take to actually run a successful organization? And that's been an exploration for me for many years. As you can see by the slide here, where we're talking about purpose, we're talking about autonomy and mastery. So as I think about how do you grow, to me that is about how do you work in your areas of strength, how do you become independent, and how do you truly live your purpose? And that also, I really love the book by Daniel Pink, Drive, where he outlined purpose, autonomy, and mastery as critical to actually really have a purposeful life. The way I look at it when I think about WonderWorks, we've really focused on, over the last 10, 11 years, we've focused on integrity. We've focused on 100% responsibility, where you are truly creating your life. We focused on what we would call genius, which to me, it's about, you're living in your area of strength. You actually practice that for many, many, years, and you get to the level of mastery. But genius is when you put all of that together and you find out what is your unique contribution to the world. And so that's something that we've focused on. Now, enter Holacracy, because to me there are many challenges in business. And with all of the decade-plus work that we've done about conscious leadership, we could really see that there was still another aspect to how do we get organizations to really be able to transform at a faster pace. Because when we talk about individual consciousness, that takes decades. It's a continual work in progress. But how do you influence the entire organization all at once in a way that is really transformative? So we can look at here some of the ongoing challenges that people face within business. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the side of the continuum that is about you've got a culture of nice, you might have really good communications, but the niceness gets in the way of really cutting through to what the real challenges are. You might have really conflict within your organization. You could have more decision-making challenges around whether it's bottlenecks. How many organizations have you been a part of, or maybe currently, where you find that everything is filtering up to an individual or a group of individuals, and therefore the work isn't getting done. So what I want to do is I want to look at those problems. We've got two ways to look at them. One is you can say, okay, is this actually a problem to solve? Because certain problems actually fit into that category. And what I think about those would be, do you want to hire applicant A or applicant B? That's a problem to solve. What are we going to do as far as, what suppliers we're going to select? Again, another problem to solve. But there's a whole other category of challenges which I would call polarities to leverage. And Polarity Partners have done some great work in this area. And what we're looking at there is we're looking at independent pairs that actually both are really critical to the success of the business. So look at this from the point of view of you've got excellence needs to happen within any business, and you also need a level of speed, specifically in the environment that we're in right now where the pace of change is enormously fast. So when I think about instead of this either-or paradigm, you still have got those either-or challenges that you need to resolve, but now it's about the genius of and. And what I love about Holacracy is it really solves how do you look at both ends of a polarity and how do you have an operational system and structure that's going to really help you leverage those polarities. So I'll start off with one that I think Holacracy deals with really phenomenally, and that is structure and flexibility. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about specific meeting practices. But basically, if you're going to be really successful, you want to make sure that you've got a structure that can hold all the talent within your organization. If you've got a really great structure, it allows much higher level of creativity. And then also you need flexibility, because if we're actually confined into very rigid roles, say job descriptions, they can be quite rigid and you're sitting there with something that doesn't represent the work that you actually do. So you need some level of flexibility of how do you iterate forward your actual throwing out job descriptions, but how do you iterate forward roles and accountabilities so that you can really deliver on the work that is needed to be delivered on within an organization. So looking at that from the point of view of, I talked about meeting practices. At the fundamental core of a holacratic organization is this notion that we are all sensors. Every day we walk into work, and the question is, it's not a matter of are you sensing challenges, are you sensing issues? The question is more, can you rapidly and reliably process them into meaningful change? And quite often, organizations are not set up for that. So what Holacracy does is it puts right at the center of its practices is this idea of everyone is a sensor. And what we're doing is we're sensing, whether from head, heart, gut or body, and we are actually sensing tensions, meaning all sorts of challenges that you're facing within your organization. And basically the definition of a tension is it's the gap between what currently is, like what's actually happening today, and what could be happening in the future. And that tension, because the word tension often, as I say it, people think, oh, that's some negative challenge, issue, problem. But a tension could also be something that's really positive. It's a potential. It's an appreciation. It's all sorts of whatever it is that you individually are sensing that truly will take the organization forward. So what Holacracy says is, let's get every single person in the organization to be able to first sense what's going on, then be able to process that tension. So we'll talk a little bit specifically in the Q&A. Ra's going to have a Q&A session, really looking at, but how do they process tensions? So that's one whole polarity that, from structure to flexibility, you've now got the flexibility to process any tension you need, and you've got a structure that can actually go ahead and make sure that every single partner that we would say in Holacracy, so employee, every single person within the organization has a way to go ahead and process those tensions. Another really important polarity that is critical to business is continuity and transformation, because there are certain things that are really the core talents, the core genius of your business, and you want continuity in those. You want those to be retained, whether it's practices, processes, whatever that might be. You're going to make sure that you are really harnessing all of that. But also, how do you make sure that there is continual transformation within your business? Because the minute you stay stationary, the minute you say, oh, we've actually achieved some pinnacle, the marketplace is changing. Competitors, others within the, other needs are arising. And so you need this continual creative, innovative, transformational energy coming through to make sure that you are truly delivering on what the marketplace wants, and also evolving what your purpose is, because that's going to it's going to have a little bit of a different expression as you go forward. So we've talked about all sorts of polarities that I think Holacracy really leverages in the most effective way. There's a number here. We're not obviously going to go into them. That's another conversation for another day. But it's this idea about how do we balance getting the work done, the task, and also how we relate to each other within organizations. And Holacracy does that in a very different way. So let's dive into really what is Holacracy. Firstly, it's a system of both governance and operations. And I say that kind of right and left hand because what we do is we pull apart meetings that are focused on operations and meetings that are focused on governance. And throughout all of our way that we view work, we have these different lenses. What is operational? What is actually governance, meaning who actually makes what decisions? What policies are in effect? So that would be governance. Operations would be, well, what projects are there? What action step? What tasks? It's an integrative way to distribute autocratic authority. And what I mean by that is each person will actually have autonomy. Each role within a holacratic environment will have autonomy. But the way that those roles are determined, everybody in a group will actually integrate their perspective. So it's both of those two things happening together. Also, it is a totally new power structure. And so there's actually a set of rules of the game which every organization that runs Holacracy actually abides by those rules of the game. So instead of having any one individual, the golden child, the boss, the person that is the untouchable, be able to run by their own set of rules, everyone agrees to abide by one set of rules. We'll talk about the actual practices that are embodied within Holacracy, but I'd like to just take a few moments before we launch into the Q&A to talk about this idea about operations versus governance. So what I'll do is I think it would be useful to have a really quick look at a tactical meeting, just to have an idea about what that might look like. And we can actually talk about how that creates structure, because as you see, there are very clear rounds or very clear parts of the agenda. There are places where you're looking at, say, metrics. What are the most important metrics for you to run your business? There's places we'll look at project updates. And what I love about project updates, it's not some rambling status report. It's literally, what have you done since the last tactical meeting? So it makes those kind of report outs, not some ongoing long-winded drone where people check email or kind of zone out in some way. But it's literally, I've either done something in the last 7 days and I say what that is, or there's no update. And then the heart of the tactical meeting is this agenda building. The agenda is building a list of what tensions are you sensing that are getting in the way of you, one of your roles, actually delivering on the purpose of this function or the organization. So then we'll move into triage. And I think, again, one of the very powerful practices within Holacracy that really creates what I would call 100% responsibility is this question that, the facilitator in a tactical meeting would ask is, what do you need to resolve your tension? So instead of me saying, okay, how can somebody else solve it, I'm asking that for myself. So that's the basic format for a tactical meeting. And then also the other side of the coin, if you like, tactical on one side, governance on the other. Governance goes ahead and it answers some of these questions. Who will make the decision? How will we decide? What processes, etc., etc. And we have another meeting process for that. It looks similar in one respect, the agenda building, then you process those agenda items. But we actually use this IDM process that actually gets people to change accountabilities, to add new roles, to amend roles. And as I say, there's a very specific process we follow, which is summarized here. And we go into that in a lot more detail in our half-day or other webinar series that we'll be doing. But the outputs of governance are really roles. What are the names of the roles? What are the accountabilities? And also policies. What are the policies that this function is going to be working around, or policies for the overall company? So with that, that's kind of a very, very quick mini introduction to Holacracy. I'm going to take a pause right now and hand it back over to Ra, and we'll go into the Q&A session.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you for the presentation. So now we're going to open it up to questions from our attendees. And if you're unfamiliar with Maestro, right now, as you may have noticed, you're all muted. And we're going to actually just open it up. And I would like to call on anybody that has any questions. And you can let me know that you have a question by pressing 1 on your dial pad of your phone. And then I'll open up your mic, and you'll be able to speak into the room. So at this time, if there's any questions, please go ahead and press 1 on your dial pad.
And something I'd love to say right now is with Maestro, just by the way, because Maestro is also an organization that runs Holacracy, so a little shout out to them on the way.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, I have a question. I think it would be valuable to discuss a little bit more in depth how Holacracy turns businesses into a attention-driven environment. Could you help us understand what that might mean?
Yeah. So in every organization that I've ever worked within, whether that's internally or externally, tensions are the lifeblood of an organization. You know, people say feedback is the breakfast of champions, but tensions are literally going to transform your business. So being able to get every single person to be able to look at what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what are the directions that we would be most effective to go in. So that's what we're looking at with tensions. The difference, I think, because yes, every organization goes ahead and raises challenges, but in a holacratic organization, you're literally having meetings that you are looking to say, we are continually collecting agenda items, like the majority of a tactical meeting agenda is actually focused on those tensions. So instead of having a meeting agenda about X, Y, and Z, we've all prepped ahead of the time. Maybe that's relevant, maybe it's no longer relevant. You know, this is actually making sure that everyone is saying, are you surfacing tensions? And in fact, with a holacratic environment, it's saying that if you're not bringing up tensions, you're not doing your job. I mean, and so it's really turning something upside down in my mind to say tensions are great. They are the life force of the organization, and that it is for you and the individual partner, the role filler, to take some time within your day and within your week to say, what is it that's getting in the way? What is it that I could leverage to actually maximize how we're doing our work and the impact that we're having in the world? So to me, it's actually a bit of a mind shift. Not only is it central both in the tactical meeting process and the governance meeting process. But it's a total mind shift to say the more tensions, the better. And I think that often, as I see the way organizations run, there's often some elephant that's sitting in the room that is not being addressed. Whereas once you start asking people to raise tensions and you are challenging people to raise tensions, the light starts to shine on the most critical areas. And that, to me, is one of the most phenomenal outputs of Holacracy.
Yeah, it's sort of like the notion of what do we call something that has no tensions? Dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone that throughout the rest of our time together on the call, you can at any time raise your hand and come into the open floor, open mic, and ask a question of Anna. And yeah, so we have also some questions that have come in prior to the call from some of our participants. Okay, I see that someone has a question. One moment while I open your mic. And please let me know how to say your name. Is it Les?
Yes, that's correct.
Hi, Les. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a question for Anna?
I do. Hi, Anna. How are you?
Hi, doing great.
Good, thanks. I'm actually following up on the conversation I had with Margaret last week and having you on a radio show with us, so I'm really delighted to be able to hear what you're talking about with Holacracy. And when you were talking about tension, I totally get the point you're making, and I love the point you just got to making about anything without tension is dead. But I've also seen an awful lot of organizations where tension can get to the point where it is quite disruptive and in fact can lead to a considerable amount of friction, which I think sometimes people tend to equate friction as not bad. Tension can certainly be good. So how do you make sure that you strike that balance, Anna?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks very much. Appreciate getting the chance to talk to you in person. When I think about when the friction starts, it's when there's no movement forward. It's a bit like, that ongoing rub with no forward momentum. In Holacracy, that question, what do you need to resolve your tension? It gets people to really own what their individual tension is, because one of the other things when I think about friction is it's actually more than likely about 6 different tensions all piled one on top of another that actually are causing all sorts of friction. The way Holacracy looks at it is we process one tension at a time sensed by one person. And what that does is it frees up the conversation to say, if it's my tension that we're actually dealing with here, the way that we create our budgeting process or our resource allocation process, let's attack something that's meaty, then I'm actually resolving my tension sensed by me. I'm not trying to resolve 4 other people's tensions that I'm making up stories about. So then what happens is I get to resolve my tension, and then the next person gets to resolve theirs, et cetera, et cetera. I would say even in the most challenging decisions, what I find is that forward momentum is actually the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? So it's actually the juice that really breaks open that conflict. Because even if somebody gets to actually say I think that I should have a bigger role within designing the budgeting process, and say for argument's sake, within our governance meeting process that's on the screen right now, say we create a role that is going to actually design the process, and I think it's going to be assigned to me. But then outside the meeting, it's not assigned to me. That brings up some tension for me. The fact that we are moving forward, my tension changes and evolves over time. But it is this iterative process that I think resolves the entire conversation around friction. Because to me, it's going around in circles that truly is the bigger issue. Is there anything else that kind of you wanted to dig into, Leslie? Because it's a challenge, but it's the iterations I think really make the difference.
Yeah, yeah, I can see your point, and it's something that probably is difficult to appreciate without actually seeing it in action.
Yeah, so I appreciate you saying that, because what our next webinar will be is actually we're going to do one that is really just purely around a tactical meeting, and then the same around a governance meeting, so that we can actually see it in action. And as I say, we've got some other offerings about that too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more offline about the radio show and some other stuff Margaret and I discussed.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Les.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your question. Great. Now we do have another hand up. I'm going to bring Robert into the room. Hi, Robert. You have a question for Anna?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I've kind of studied this a little bit. I'm going to go to your half-day seminar tomorrow, but and I've kind of got the overview of how this works abstractly. But I was wondering if you could give a couple of examples of how work is moved forward in a project through either a governance meeting or a tactical meeting, and maybe even if it's not too big of a question, an example of how someone might move from a hierarchical structure and start instituting and moving towards holacracy structure.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Yeah, it's a great question. So maybe the most simple way that I would look at that is I would take my experience this morning. So we were having a conversation. This was between Ra, Margaret, and myself. And so the project, let's call the project the webinar, and we were talking about introductions. So there's a whole way that I am pretty casual, informal style, and so I have that kind of approach. And Margaret's saying, but yes, but there does need to be some level of formal introduction. So just to appreciate that the polarity of different ways to go about that. And so right now, currently, Ra is new to WonderWorks, and so it is not actually clarified within our governance structure about who does introductions on webinars, and there's some detail that is not fleshed out. So to walk you through that example, we've got the governance meeting process on the screen here. At our next governance meeting, one of us, I know whoever gets it on the agenda first, will have attention around webinar introductions, like who designs them, who speaks them, who creates them. And what we would do is present the proposal. I propose that the webinar coordinator role is accountable for, and we're actually going to put down ing words. You're going to start with an ing word that actually describes the work that they're doing. So somebody could be responsible for creating the introduction, and somebody else could be responsible for presenting or speaking the introduction. So basically, we would get to that level of explicit governance so that it's not about what Anna wants or what Margaret wants. It's actually about what role is responsible for what decision-making authority, and that's the process. So you'd present a proposal, clarifying questions, reaction round, amend and clarify. Whoever the proposer was would amend and clarify. And then the meat of Holacracy, something that really I think is enormously powerful, is this idea of an objection round, where you have to have what is a valid objection to be able to change the proposal in any way. So in that respect, we will get really clear governance, which will make the role for the actual work that I'm doing, the work that Ra's doing, the work that Margaret's doing, be really clear and explicit, and we won't waste time on something that just doesn't need three people having a discussion on it. So does that make sense for the first part of your question, Robert?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great example. Thank you.
Yeah, and so to me, the time and efficiency factor, you think about all of those different wages times by 3, and you go, come on, that's ludicrous. Whereas a lot of people think the governance meeting process, it's like, oh, wow, do we really want to get such explicit governance? But we look at governance as slow down to speed up, because now every single time we have a webinar, that is so clear. So that was the first part. Now, you talked on the second part of your question, you talked about how to, and what I interpreted was, how do you start to move away from a hierarchical structure? Did I capture that correctly, Robert?
Yes, but before you move on to that, I was sort of confused about, or not clear on, so it seems like you set a role in the governance meeting, and then commensurately in the tactical meeting, you just figure out how the person with the capacity or the responsibility to make that role happen actually makes it happen, and then works out any cross-functional dependencies or whatnot. Is that how a tactical meeting works?
Yeah, so how it happened is, so in the governance meeting, we created that role, and it's now webinar coordinator, whatever the role's called. Now, outside of the governance meeting, the lead link of the circle, and we haven't talked about lead links yet, but basically they are no longer managers in the system, but there is one role called a lead link. The lead link has got the primary accountabilities of assigning roles, and that's outside of meetings. They've got the responsibility of allocating resources and also prioritizing the work of a circle. So a circle or a function, or we can talk a bit more about that later. So that lead link would assign the role. So say now, Margaret, our lead link, would assign the role to Ra, and that's where it ends. As far as dependencies and all of those pieces, they would end up being tensions. So if Ra now is in the webinar coordinator role and is got no tension coming up, then he's just going to continue doing his work. Now, if he's got some dependency issue like, okay, Anna, you in your webinar presenter role are not getting me the material I need on time, then that would come up in, more than likely, an operation, a tactical meeting, and it would be, or he'd just call me. I mean, we wouldn't wait for a meeting. He'd just send me a Skype message and go, where's the presentation? But if I continually didn't supply that, then he might bring that up in a tactical meeting and say, I've had this challenge. I actually think that we didn't talk about checklist items, but I need to add a checklist item of webinar slides, sent to webinar coordinator, check or no check. And so every single tactical meeting, or maybe monthly, just before the webinar, that would be a tactical meeting item. Is that done? I would say check, or I would say no check. It would drive accountability for me to actually deliver what I am accountable to deliver. And so then, there wouldn't be that whole issue of waiting. So does that help?
Yes. And I can kind of extrapolate from there, but what about when people need to work together rather than autonomously? Would that become an agenda item or a checklist where people would, get together and do their collaborative work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of different ways I would look at that. Say, for argument's sake, building the budgeting process. That's something that I can build the process maybe on my own, but if I did that in isolation, it might not be the greatest process in the world. So I would still have total autonomy and accountability for that, but I might set up a meeting, which in a tactical meeting, or I could just send a doodle poll, or however we, collectively get meetings put together. But in a tactical, I could say, I'd like to have a meeting scheduled with you, and you, your role, and your role. And actually, then that would be captured in our Glass Frog, is what we use for our to capture all of our governance and to actually work through tactical meetings. It's a software system. So I'd capture that, and then at the end of the meeting, when we press close the meeting, there would be a follow-up item sent to one person to schedule that meeting. We would have that meeting, and then I would glean whatever I needed to. Doesn't mean I do whatever those people tell me to do, but I get whatever input, I get that collaborative energy, and now I design my process. So that's one way. The second way is where it's not just I've got all the decision-making power. You might have a situation where in governance you might actually want to propose that designing the budgeting process while integrating the feedback of business development, controller, and whomever else, other roles. And now that's actually where I'm expected to gather their feedback. And so it might look exactly the same, but I'm actually, on one, I'm individually choosing to collaborate, and on the other, there's an expectation that I must collaborate because it's an accountability of mine. But those meetings don't get run as a governance meeting or a tactical meeting, and that is just whatever meeting practices that are really helpful and useful to get that brainstorming, collaborative energy all harnessed. The difference is if I have the ultimate decision-making authority, because it's I have to integrate their feedback, I can determine when the meeting can end. So we might have booked it for an hour, but in 35 minutes I've got everything I need, and I go, great, really appreciate it, guys. I've got exactly what I need to make my decisions, and now off you go. We're not trying to convince or influence or force or maneuver each other. It's my decision-making, and I've got what I need. Now, if they've got tensions about that later after they see the process, then we'll bring that to governance or operations, or we'll just have a one-on-one conversation, whatever's needed.
Clarifies that a lot. Thank you.
I never answered the question about the hierarchy, and I'm thinking that I'd maybe ask for. So, do you still want that question answered?
If there's time, sure.
Yeah, and so when I think about holacracy, I get asked the question, is it all or nothing? And that's not necessarily the question you're asking, but it's the one that pops in my mind. To get all the benefits of holacracy, it is a holistic system. That's what makes it, that's what creates the, I use the word magic because that's the experience I have, but this is not, it's not a magic potion or a silver bullet. You are working through these processes, and that is the magic, is the actual process of holacracy. So if I was going to do one thing and I was kind of dipping my toe in, I would look at maybe implementing the tactical meeting process. But for me, everything is available online. We can provide you with the meeting processes and the constitution, and you can dive in and have fun and see what your experience is. But just to be honest, I have not seen an individual implementation, or I've seen very few individuals who actually implement themselves that actually are running holacracy at the end of it. Because it is actually a holistic system that takes quite a bit of practice and knowledge to actually go ahead and really dive in deep. So what I would suggest is, if you're diving in deep, I hear that you're coming to the intro day, so that's great. You'll get some more information and your experience a tactical and a governance. But you can trial it yourself. You can have tensions that are raised, and then you can get support of whatever way that looks. But start either with breaking out governance into roles or trying out a tactical meeting. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Great. Thank you so much, Robert. And just want to, again, remind everyone that if you have any questions moving forward, just press 1 on your dial pad, and I will open up your mic, and more than happy to have some questions coming in live. So at this time, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. Oh, okay, cool, just got one. All right, Nina, you have a question for Anna.
Yeah, hi, Anna. My question for you is, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between a checklist review and a project update, and kind of what differentiates kind of what things go on which list.
Right. All right, and now I'm going to pop that on the screen so we're looking at the same thing. So when I think about a checklist review, what we're looking at is it's a question that you would ask that can be answered by check or no check, meaning yes or no. So if I think about my weekly review, meaning if any of you have done the David Allen Getting Things Done work, whether you have or you haven't, if you've got some organizational system, and have you reviewed your calendar? Have you got your inbox down to zero? Just create a little shudder through the call as I say that one. Have you kind of got your organizational system checked? So I would say organizational system up to date, check or no check. And Anna today would say no check. And then I'd go round and ask Ra and ask Margaret. So that's a checklist review. It could be a piece of equipment that needs to be maintained on a particular schedule, maybe quarterly. And again, you would just say, X equipment maintained, check or no check, and they would answer. So it really makes sure that important issues that could get missed, they get put on the checklist and review. Now, project updates, that's actually something that will be completed within a specific amount of time. So if I think about an accountability is ongoing. A project is something that is more than one action step, and it will be completed in a month, 3 months, whatever the time period is. So with those project updates, could be revise WonderWorks webinar series, or actually that would be the wrong way to name the project, because what we do with projects is we name them in past tense completed, because how many of you have had the experience of when is the project done? Because it was never named in a way that you knew when it was done. So we would say webinar series updated. And it's like, when has that happened? Or flow of webinar series determined, or whatever that might be. And so we would know when it was done. And again, as we said about the project updates, then we would ask in every single tactical meeting, which is normally weekly, we would be saying, what's the update since the last tactical meeting? And that would be that project update. Does that answer, Nina? Does that clarify the difference?
That's very helpful, yeah. Thank you.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Nina. All right, so I'm going to move into some questions that we had come into our Maestro conferencing system as people were registering. You were given the opportunity to ask some questions. So I'm just going to read one of those off here. Anna, can you talk about, it's basic, obviously there's like a lot of mainstream kind of attention that Holacracy is getting. There's some interesting kind of misconceptions that have also been sort of put forward. We have a question in that regards. Is Holacracy a flatter organizational structure without managers?
So what I would say is Holacracy is definitely still a hierarchical system, but it is a hierarchy of the circles. We use a circle structure. And there's normally somewhere between 8 and 12 people in each circle, sometimes only 3 or 4. But basically, a circle is a chunk of work, and that it takes more than, it takes a number of roles to actually get that work done, and so it ends up being between, say, 3 and 12 people. So it's a hierarchy of circles, not a hierarchy of people. That's the actual difference. Where I would say, rather than flatter, what I would say is decision-making is distributed throughout the organization. And so decisions are happening at the level within the organization, i.e. with the role that needs to make those decisions, which that to me is one of the things I think people start talking about with flatter. But I would say that flatter is the wrong word to use. I would think of it more as a hierarchy of circles rather than a hierarchy of people. And I think that the other piece that, when I think about maybe even the polarity of centralized and decentralized, Holacracy is not a decentralized system. It is actually a system and structure that leverages both centralization and decentralization. So as I think about that, certain decisions, they need to be decentralized. They need to happen at the source. How we're going to bottle product needs to happen with the people that are actually bottling the product. If you're talking about how we're potentially going to be, and this is all arguable what I'm just about to say, but if you're talking about budgeting, there might be aspects of budgeting that you really want to centralize, i.e. the actual process, the actual templates that you use. So you would centralize those functions. So it's not actually got a value judgment about what's like good or bad, centralized bad, decentralized good, or vice versa. It's saying what is going to allow us to deliver on the purpose of this organization most effectively. There might be more about that, but that's what kind of pops to mind in this moment as I think about that.
Yeah, it's sort of like the notion that it's not that there aren't managers, it's that the role of manager is actually being kind of distributed. It kind of reminds me of the famous quote of Sasumi Uchikawa, who said, no problem is a problem. Manager's job is to see problems. And it's sort of like that takes us back to the first question around the business becoming a attention-driven environment and creating more of those sensory apparatus within the organization for its own success and being able to move forward with its purpose. And that kind of brings us maybe to,
can I jump in? You figured something else, because I knew there was a part of the question that I actually wasn't listening to, and I just realized what it was. It was a bit about managers. So as I think about, when I think about how Holacracy deals with that, if I think about certain roles within Holacracy are these, outside of Holacracy, certain roles are these one block. So, thinking about one big block, a job description. Whereas in Holacracy, what a person, a partner that is actually working within a holacratic environment, they've got all these different roles added together, which to me is why you can create an entire experience that you love. But the other part of it is, what I wanted to do is really look at the difference between lead links and managers. Because as you're saying, Ra, here, managers really, they wear a multitude of different hats. They've got all sorts of things that they are meant to be good at. And so this idea of a manager no longer exists. You have a lead link, and I said that they're about allocating resources, assigning roles, and prioritizing the work of the circle. But there's all these other parts of a manager's role, developing, training, providing feedback, coaching, approving things, reviewing things. So instead of them being all glommed together in this one role that, let's face it, some managers are really talented and can do a whole bunch of different things that require different skills, but other managers not so much. And when you think about the engagement surveys, most people leave their jobs or hate their jobs because of the person, the manager, the boss that they report to. So what Holacracy does is it totally blows that apart and says, let's make roles about chunks of work that live together, meaning the same kind of skills are needed, so that then the lead link can assign someone who is a great fit for role. So it's about blowing up a manager into many different roles. However, in an organization, a number of those different roles could be assigned to one person. They're just no longer a manager with this position power that they can then use in sometimes dysfunctional ways. They actually, when they're participating in a circle, whether it be in a tactical meeting or in a governance meeting, all roles are equal. You're there energizing your role, participating in the process, and that's, I think, the very different part of no managers. But I just wanted to kind of add that. Thanks, Ra.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, this kind of brings us to another notion in terms of that often comes up when people are sort of new to Holacracy is how do you create and maintain accountability in Holacracy? And rather than actually ask you that now, I see that we have another question from Robert, which maybe I'm going to check in with Robert to see how much more pertinent that might be. Robert.
Hi, how you doing? I just wanted to add on to the subject you're talking about right now is kind of like what the structure is. It seems to me, I mean, I haven't really been able to think about it too much, that the circle structure, I guess, of Holacracy is sort of like a matrix structure in terms of how lead links and projects are related to one another. Am I totally off base, or are they related, or how does that?
Okay, let's have a quick look. What I would say is, I'm going to just flick up a slide. So when we think about holacratic structure, this would be one visual representation of an organization, actually Dev Bootcamp, that have implemented Holacracy in San Francisco, and they've got offices throughout the country. So you see these different circles. When I think about, you had said about a matrix, rather than a matrix is I report to this person, and that person, and sometimes there can be a lack of clarity in that. There can be a lack of, well, you know, these two things bump up against each other, and am I listening to this person or that person? The difference that I would say in Holacracy is I may be in a circle with a lead link in one circle, a lead link in another circle, and another one. So say if I was in product and I'm in engineering and I've got a role in both of those different circles, I'm going to have two lead links. It's not that I am reporting to that lead link. It's not that kind of relationship. There are certain accountabilities the lead link has. They will assign me to a role. They will unassign me to a role. They will give me feedback about whether I'm a good fit for that role. But I think the difference is, rather than having the idea of matrix, is the difference in Holacracy is the level of explicit clarity about what I'm doing in each individual circle, whereas matrix more implies how many people am I reporting to. Does that clarify that?
Robert?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks very much. Back over to you, Ra.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so I just want to present that we have 7 minutes left on the call. Anna, is there anything that you feel really pertinent to speak into, or shall we continue with Q&A?
Yeah, I think it's Q&A. You had said something about accountability. I think you were going in that direction, which I think actually makes sense. And I'm wondering, I think I might have a slide about accountability that could help.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a fairly common question in terms of how does Holacracy work to create and maintain accountability? For instance, based on the notion like if there are no managers.
Yeah, and which is totally an excellent question. For me, when I think about accountability, it's a bit like that. We don't have overseers, like the person that's standing over me going, oh, you did that, and, and kind of checking on me in that respect. So the notion is that I've got my accountabilities. I prioritize them. I prioritize all my accountabilities in each of my roles, and I do my work. I choose the how of I do my work. And the reason why I can choose the how of how I do my work is because we set up metrics that matter. So the metrics review is all about, and I think this is actually one of the, when I think about the first 6 months to a year of the early implementation of Holacracy, it really is about, have we got great metrics? And normally the answer is no. Very rarely do people go, oh no, we have that down. We really know our metrics. And it is about, what are the metrics that matter? What do we need to be measuring? What do we need to be reporting in? What number? So we have, metrics are basically one number per metric. And the measure for me of whether a metric is valuable or not is, does it actually change behavior? Like if we see website hits and we say 8,500, does that actually change behavior? What actually happens as a result of that? If we look at number of students and we see a number, does actually something happen? And if nothing's going to happen as a result of actually seeing that, it might be just a nice to know, and it actually doesn't need to be reported out at a meeting. There might be some internal, intranet or shared folder where you've got a whole bunch of reports and numbers that people can draw upon. But what are the metrics that are going to drive accountability, that are going to, not about me holding you accountable, how are we looking at our metrics so that we are being held accountable towards the purpose of the organization?
Thanks, Anna. Robert, you have a follow-up to that?
Yes, I do. So what about the sort of continuous improvement sort of metrics or accountabilities or tensions within any given holacratic system? Like, okay, is this working? How do we modify it? How do we adjust it? How do we improve on Holacracy in general?
Yeah. So when I think about that continuous improvement, that to me is what the engine of tensions. Now you might have specific practices where you have got, you've launched a product, and so there's some measurement criteria and there's some, testing, and that could be a whole person's role. That could be a role that somebody's energizing. But what are the actual metrics that we're bringing to the entire circle? So the question is, what do we want to raise at a circle level, and what is more role-specific metrics? And obviously there's some level of one will roll up to the other. The other thing that you said there is about tensions. To me, accountability is driven by tensions. Because if I'm actually seeing that something isn't happening, I'm raising a tension. This is getting in the way of our circle delivering on its purpose. So each role, is it the lead link? Is it each individual role? They're checking out what is getting in the way of me delivering on my role's purpose and on the circle's purpose. So that is really, I would say, one of the biggest drivers of accountability in the system. Did I answer your question, Robert, or was there a part of that I could follow up on?
Yeah, that answers most of it. And then how about even on a higher level with like the entire holacratic system itself?
Oh, right. Okay, so kind of iterating how you do holacracy?
Yeah, like, if it's going to evolve as a structure for organizations.
Yeah, so right now we've just literally launched a new circle, which is one that I participate in. There are a total of 4 providers, if you like, licensees. There's Holacracy One. There's one in the U.S. There's one in the U.S. being us. There's also, there's one in Australia and there's one in France. And Holacracy One being the main body, and then the 3 licensed providers. We actually collectively come together on for tactical and governance meetings to actually answer this question. But that also does happen within every organization that has implemented holacracy. So that would be not specified in the proposal, meaning they will determine how they want to do that, and I'll work with them about that. But there is a central iteration process as well. And I'm just noticing I've got 40 seconds, so I'm going to hand it on over to Ra. I'm going to say my thank you. I really appreciate the great questions coming up. I do have integrity as the highest order, so I'll hand it to Ra so we can close up in 10 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Great. So thank you, everyone who joined us on the call today. Really appreciate having you with us. Hope that you got a lot out of the call and that you'll continue to join us on our future webinars coming up in the months to come. And we'll be providing a lot more resources and information on the WonderWorks website as well. And we'll also have a supplemental follow-up to send out to you via email with the PowerPoint slides and also recording of the call. So once again, thank you so much, and we look forward to helping everyone be WonderWorkers in the world. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, everybody have a good day.